Hi, welcome to SBR Videos. I'm Peter Loshak. It's the first week in August right now, and we are previewing college football conferences with Joe Duffy from OffshoreInsiders.com. Right now, we're going to take a look at the very interesting Sun Belt Conference. Joe Duffy, is the Sun Belt a conference that you tend to find decent value over the course of the regular season?
Yeah, we like both the big and the small conferences, but in conferences like the Sun Belt, a lot of those injuries can go under the radar, especially when you're talking about like an offensive line injury and where a team is short on the offensive line or the defensive line. And truthfully, some of the best value comes when you've got bad teams in small conferences.
Joe Duffy's picks all throughout the NFL preseason and, of course, college football regular season and the rest of MLB can be found at his website, OffshoreInsiders.com. All right, Joe, let's see what insights you can give us into the Sun Belt. The favorite to win the Sun Belt is Appalachian State. They won 6 in a row to close out last year, and they returned 20 starters. So, you know, in a division, in a conference like the Sun Belt, having a strong end to a season and then returning 20 starters from that team, very promising. Do you think we're going to see covers from Appalachian State?
They had a bunch of youth last year. As I like to say, the baptism by fire. They were mostly freshmen and sophomores last year, and they clearly did what you expect a young team to do. They closed out the season strong, winning 6 straight. They've got 4 offensive linemen back. They have a star running back in Marcus Cox. So Appalachian State has really followed the script so far where they've gotten better. Now, of course, they do have the burden of the higher expectations. As you said, there are some preseason publications that have them as the favorites, and everybody has them as among the favorites. So what they're really going to have to deal with more is the burden of high expectations for sure. And they have 10 starters back on defense. So they could be a little bit of an under team.
All right, and then Georgia Southern is the second choice in the Sun Belt. An interesting team, an interesting program. They almost beat 2 Power 5 teams last year, right? Georgia Tech and NC State. They're going to have to overhaul their offensive line, though, and that's that's troubling when you have a program from the Sun Belt with major issues in such a key component of their offense, like the offensive line. But then again, this program, they weren't bowl eligible last year, so that's probably motivating this year. What's your take on Georgia Southern? I'm not exactly sure as of right now what I think about them.
I actually think you're going to get some fairly low totals for Georgia Southern because they had great defensive numbers last year, and they do have some great defensive guys back. But with that low total, I think there's going to be value because most of the preseason publications agree that Georgia State's going to throw the ball more. They're going to open up their offense. It's their second year in their coach Fritz's system, and they are really expected to pick up the tempo. And it gets back to my golden rule that totals aren't so much about offensive and defensive efficiency and competency. It's more about the pace. And because I think that Georgia Southern is going to pick up the pace a great deal, and you'll probably have some fairly low totals, I look for them to be a team that's going to sneak over the total. They should be an over team, especially early.
Arkansas State is the third choice in the Sun Belt, and everything that Arkansas State does positively is on offense, right? They always put up points. Defense last year was a big question mark. The defense only returns 4 starters this year. I know injuries were a big deal for them last year, but just in general, defense is a weakness for this team. Points is how they get it done, and so I'm thinking that we see overs, even though the totals will be high. I think we see overs from Arkansas State. What do you think, Joe?
Well, Arkansas State is certainly a poster child of exactly what I've said. The reason that they're so high scoring is because they love playing that up tempo. Freddie Knight and 8 other starters do return on offense, and it's a very up-tempo offense. They have their top 6 wide receivers back, so they're very deep at wide receiver. But then again, when you run this up-tempo offense, you better have depth at wide receiver, and that they do have. The problem was their defense wore down as the year went on, and that's not shocking. What happens when you play such an up-tempo, your defense especially is going to get worn down, and that's been discussed many times. Usually, of course, the offense, one team's offense and the other team's defense are going to be on the field for the same number of plays, but the defense is in pursuit the entire time, where the offensive line, once the ball gets past the line of scrimmage, they're not necessarily still pursuing the ball. So usually up-tempo will wear down a defense more than it will an offense, and I think that's what happened to Arkansas State last year. I'm going to keep a close eye to see if maybe they possibly at times try to slow down the tempo, especially to give their defense a break. So that's where I will really be reading between the lines each and every week to see if there's any hint of them maybe slowing it down. But you are correct. They, on surface, they would appear to be a team that's going to have high totals, but they still might not be able to make the totals high enough. But let's keep very close attention to some of the beat writers as far as if there's any possibility they're going to slow the pace down.
All right, now let's make some out of left field calls from the rest of the Sun Belt. I'll start Joe Duffy. I'm thinking we might see overs with New Mexico State. Last year, the New Mexico State moved to an up-tempo, quick passing game under their offensive coordinator, and they might not have the personnel to have an explosive offense, but it's what they're doing, and that's how they're playing. So it's leading to higher scoring. Their defense was awful last year, probably going to be awful again this year. They just have one of these defenses that probably is never going to be good unless they start somehow miraculously recruiting better players on defense. Their offensive line should be more experienced this year. So an experienced offensive line, an up-tempo offense as their identity, and a defense probably going to be awful again. I'm thinking overs with New Mexico State, even if we see high totals. What do you think about that analysis, Joe Duffy?
We're actually going to go a little bit head-to-head
really?
on those check marks, as I say. Keep in mind that their offensive coordinator, Greg Brandon, he took a small college head coaching job at like Grand Canyon or something like that. So he, who really ran that up-tempo offense, won't be back on the play calling. Meanwhile, they do have 10 starters back on defense. And again, what happens when you run that up-tempo offense, your defense is going to get plenty of experience. I do think, if anything, they might slow the tempo down a little bit, especially the running back, Larry Rose, is one of their better players who is back, and he rushed for 1,100 yards last year. So I think there might be a little bit more emphasis on the run, and with their offensive coordinator taking a small college head coaching job, that they might slow down the pace a little bit. And with the 10 guys back on defense, again, they're back on defense. They put up awful numbers, but that's because they were on the field a lot. They got plenty of experience. So I think they could be a under team, in fact.
All right, fair enough. Joe Duffy from OffshoreInsiders.com. I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for all those things with New Mexico State this year. What out of left field prediction would you like to make from the rest of the Sun Belt?
There's a lot of stuff that we have, news and notes. A quarter for South Alabama. They do have some guys who are back, and they benefited at the most. Remember, UAB dropped their program, and of course, when a school drops their program, the transfers can play right away. And South Alabama, not that UAB was exactly a powerhouse, but South Alabama was able to pick up quite a few players from UAB who, of course, can play right away. So I do think that South Alabama should be improved, and especially as the year goes along, because, of course, there's going to be maybe some chemistry problems early on. But I think UAB, and then, of course, now UAB's looks like they're going to wind up playing again, but these guys still transferred, not going to play this year. But South Alabama, I think, could be a team that gets better as the year goes on.
What do you think about Idaho? I'm thinking Idaho might also be what I'm reading on New Mexico State. They have some good weapons on offense. Defense, again, was awful last year. They're trying to change it. How successful will it be? I don't know, but they have playmakers on offense, questionable defense. What do you think about maybe overs from Idaho?
And the thing about Idaho, I think they're going to be improved. They've gotten better, or some might say more accurately, less worse each year. They were a team that was on probation, and it limited their practice time. And practice time is very important. You even hear coaches where they say they love going to a bowl. If they're like a bubble team, going to a bowl is a big benefit because they get the extra practice time the year before that, where they wouldn't if they didn't make a bowl. And in the case of Idaho, they're no longer limited because of sanctions. They're going to practice a lot more this year, and I think that is something that really sneaks under the radar. And I do think that Idaho will be a pretty live underdog for sure.
Okay, actually, looking over the Sun Belt, I'm seeing a lot of teams I'm thinking might be overs. Also, Texas State and Troy supposedly playing more up-tempo in addition to everything we've already mentioned. One team that might be good for unders, though, Louisiana Monroe. 8 starters back on a veteran defense and 5 starters back on a questionable offense. Quarterback is uncertain. There's major inexperience at quarterback, issues on the offensive line. Defense is probably going to be the strength of this team. They're ranked in the mid-range of the Sun Belt, and whatever success they have is probably going to be coming from a stronger defense. What do you think about unders with Louisiana Monroe?
They look like they're going to be playing a more balanced offense. Last year, they threw the ball a lot. They're expected to have more balance and a better running game. And as you said, a lot of experience back on defense. 6 of their top 7 tacklers were back. And Louisiana Monroe was a team that had played close in so many of their losses last year. And I always say that won and lost straight up record is the single most overrated statistic when it comes to handicapping. Louisiana Monroe could have easily had a better straight up record last year. So I do think they'll come into this season a little bit undervalued. So I do think they could be, I have them pegged as a probable undervalued spread team entering the year. year.
All right, well, I think there's a lot of wait-and-see situations in the Sun Belt. I'd say as of right now, my two strongest overall leans to sum up are overs with Arkansas State and unders with Louisiana Monroe. Again, very wait-and-see, and I'm definitely taking to heart what you said about New Mexico State. What would you say are your strongest check marks as of right now in the Sun Belt? Just casual leans, Joe Duffy.
Yeah, casual leans, again, I tend to look for ugly underdogs. I know that people don't like betting on the perceived inferior teams. Therefore, sometimes those underdogs are of value. And I do think that New Mexico State and Idaho are two teams that could, they might lose some games straight up, but they're going to cover them.
Joe Duffy from OffshoreInsiders.com. As always, thank you so much for all your insights and thoughts.